G'day poker people, welcome back. After we blasted through our downswing and got the win rate back up near where we wanted it to be for the $60 an hour 1-3 challenge. I wasn't quite there yet though, still want to put in more volume and see if we can finally get back above the $60 an hour mark. So I was in the very next day for a high hand promotion at Derby Lane, looking to get some more volume in. Not to mention I missed the first 11 days of December with the flu, so the rush was on to get the volume in and get that $500 bonus for playing 50 hours in the month of December. Popped a little bit of a bad beat and ran into top of range versus traffic on my way to Derby Lane. Actually, the highway was shut down because it was actually a line to go and donate toys for charity. So I guess I can't complain about that too much. But after about an hour and a half in traffic, finally get to Derby Lane about an hour late, sit straight into a 1-3 game where we play these interesting hands. I don't want to waste any more time. I wasted enough in traffic. Let's get into the gambling and let's go. So after that awful traffic, we finally get seated in a 1-3 game and we're in it for 1,000 bangers where we play this first interesting hand, which is actually a double board bomb pot. Let's go, love these bloody things. I'm in the cutoff with Queen Jack of Hearts and we see the two flops. The first one is Ace Ace 4 Rainbow with one heart though, so backdoor Royal Flush Draw on that board. And then on the second one we have Jack 6 3 with two diamonds, so top pair there. I'm pretty happy with that, to be honest. And then the small blind checks and the big blind bets out for 10, and then before the action gets back to me, literally everyone at the table calls the 10, which I guess is not that surprising since it is such a small bet. But when the action's on me here, I think with the vast majority of our range, we're going to want to play as a raise or a fold here. Maybe if we had specifically pocket aces, there's merit to trapping and letting the opponents improve on the first board. But in a double board bomb pot, you're going to benefit so much from equity denial when there's so many ranges involved and your hand is so vulnerable. So then I look at this hand and I'm like, is this one strong enough to raise or should we just be folding it? And I do think it is pretty borderline with the Jack Queen kicker, but I think there is a benefit to raising here, and it's mostly because I do think it's very likely at least one of the people, this V-Pips, does have an Ace X, but if they had Ace X with a stronger kicker, I think they would have at least considered raising at some point. And the fact that they've just flattered that like maybe their range is a bit weaker and they just don't feel that confident with like an ace with a weak kicker, and I definitely want to attack that weakness by showing a lot of strength. So I decide to raise this one up. I go ahead and make it 75, and then I only get called by the big blind who let out. So our heads up to two different turns. The first one's a Jack of Spades, giving us a pair there, so we're pretty happy to see that. The second one is the King of Spades, putting our backdoor spades on that board, but also downgrading us from, we don't have top pair on that board anymore. When the big blind checks it over to me again, I think the chances that they do have a weaker Ace X is very likely here. And honestly, I think we can bluff them off of it. The fact that he let out for such a small size on the flop, I think he's aware that ace with a weak kicker here is not like super strong. So I really think we can just put the screws to him and just blast him off of those hands. And even if he doesn't and he does call, we almost definitely have him beat on the second board, since I don't think he plays ace king like this ever. So I decide to go for it. I rip it all in for 275, and then the big blind is in the tank. As soon as he starts tanking, I'm thinking, yep, probably a weak Ace X hand, maybe a hand that's like a flush draw on the second board too, which we actually scoop. So if we got called by that, we wouldn't mind. But really rooting for the fold because I think the chances they have Ace X is very likely. Then after about 30 seconds of tanking, they fold their hand. So let's go. We're scooping the first bomb pot of this session. You love to see it. G'day poker people, I'm here today to tell you about my new favourite app that is helping me improve my game day by day, and it is the Fastroll Poker app. Essentially what it is, it's a hand history tracker for live poker players, something akin to Poker Tracker for online poker, but they're bridging the gap and they're making it for live players and following a very user-friendly, intuitive software. You can input the hand histories literally right after you're done playing them in a matter of seconds. It takes me about 15 to 30 seconds after I've played each hand, and they're stored on a database inside the app. And the beautiful thing about that is after the session's over, I can go back and look over the hands I've played and see what I'm doing well and more commonly where I've punted off a lot of money and thus helping me know what the leaks in my games are and then how I can plug them. So I cannot recommend this app strongly enough if you are a serious poker player. I've been offered many sponsorship deals in the past from things I think were a bit shady. This is the first thing I actually wanted to promote because I think it is actually a very good tool which will help you guys actually improve your poker game. So if you want to try it out, use the code LEBETS when you purchase an annual subscription and you'll get the first month free. If you don't like it after the first month, you're totally fine to cancel without charge. But I really think you guys are going to love this app and can't recommend it strongly enough. It's a massive tool to help your game. So use the code LEBETS on an annual subscription and you'll get the first month free. For now though, let's fast roll back into the gambling. Back into some good old-fashioned 1-3 for this next hand. A passive player limps under the gun, and then I'm in the low jack with queen jack offsuit, and I make what is honestly a kind of spewy isolation here, but folding is boring. I raise it up to 20, and then the under the gun player calls. So it heads up to a flop of 10-9-3 with 2 hearts. So pretty decent flop for queen jack here. So when the opponent bets it over to me, want to mix in a bit of a C bet here. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of king high and ace high combinations, which even if they don't fold on this street, are probably going to fold to continue barreling. So I decide to start mixing in a bluff here. I go ahead and bet 20, and then the under the gun player calls. So we are heads up to a turn, which is the ace of clubs. Definitely not in love with this turn card. Like I said, I think my opponent is going to call with a lot of their ace high hands on the flop. Having said that though, when they check it over to me, I do want to kind of continue bluffing on this. The SPR is a little bit over 1.5, so I think if we want to go all in as a bluff here, this is a pretty natural hand to do it with. If my opponent does not have one of those ace-x hands and essentially has any hand that's worse, I think they're going to be pretty hard pressed to call off here. So I rip it all in for 115, and then the under the gun player hesitates a little bit before throwing in the call. Not quite what we wanted to see. Chances they have an ace is very likely, but at least we have some equity to suck out. And the river is the 7 of hearts. That's not great. I show my hand and then the villain shows ace 10 of spades. So pretty bad turn for us and definitely running into top of range on this one. Having said that, it's my own damn fault for isolating such a shitty hand pre-flop. So maybe don't be doing that going forward. Let's try and play some stronger hands from here on out. Don't think I have a great table image at this point. So the same villain from the previous hand limps in the low jack, and then I'm in the high jack with ace queen. This hand is definitely strong enough to raise. I go ahead and ISO it to 20, and then the limper calls. And we heads up to a flop of ace 9-8 with 2 diamonds. You love to see that. When the villain checks it over to me, I want to use a large bet size here, not only because it's an ace high board, but because the opponent probably thinks I'm a maniac. So I think the chances they call me light here, even to a big sizing, is very likely. So I go ahead and bet 30, and then the villain throws in the call. We heads up to a turn, which is the 9 of clubs pairing middle pair. Not necessarily the best turn card in the world. My opponent probably has a bunch of 9x combinations in their range, but when they check it over to me, I still think we have a pretty clear all in here. It'll be a big overbet, but my opponent saw me do that with a bluff in the previous hand we played against each other, so I definitely think it's a good spot to go for thin value. They're not going to fold any ace-x to me, and some chance they hero call with a draw or a pair that's worse than ace-x. So I rip it all in for 150, and then the low jack lets out a groan, and he's like, and I'm like, well, that's a good sign. Definitely didn't want to get snap called here. And then after a few seconds of tanking, he does throw in the call. I show my hand, and then the villain shows pocket sixes. Pretty surprised to see him call off with that hand, but I guess my aggressive table image is paying off here. The river's a 7 of diamonds, so they do not hit the 2 outer, and we're raking in this pot using the best of our spewy image. Let's go. I think this next hand's a really interesting one, and it definitely starts off on a positive note because we've got the under the gun straddle on. You love to see it. Then the action folds to my button with queen 5 of hearts. I open it up to 20, and then I only get called by the passive straddle. So it heads up to a flop of ace king king rainbow with 1 heart. When the villain checks it over to me, I think this is a pretty good spot to check back. I think the villain is going to have so many ace x and king x combinations in their range, and if I was going to bluff, I would probably prefer something with a little less showdown value than queen high, in all honesty. I don't do that though. I c-bet for 25. I think this is too loose and a bad spot to be c-betting super wide, so maybe seeing a little bit of spewing over aggression coming into play. So I go and make it 25, and then unsurprisingly, the straddle does call. So it heads up to a turn, which gives us a bit of hope because it's the 3 of hearts giving us the flush draw. When the villain checks it over to me, now I think we have a really interesting decision point because, as I mentioned, I think the opponent has a bunch of ace-x and king-x combinations on this board. So maybe it's a good spot to check and just try to draw for as cheap as possible. Having said that though, it definitely is tempting to go ahead and mix in a really large bet here. If my opponent has any hand worse than ace-x, they are not going to call a large bet on this board. And additionally, I think the chances that we get check raised here is like, I don't think we ever get check raised on this board because even if my opponent does have a nutted hand like king queen, they're going to be worried that we have ace king or pocket aces. So I don't think we are ever getting check raised here. So it definitely makes it tempting to go ahead and put in a big bet. And then we know if we do get called, my opponent has a strong range. And if we get there on the river, we can go ahead and overbet massive to get paid. And it will just work to define our opponent's range. I decide to go for it in this instance. I go ahead and bet 75. Definitely might be a losing play when my opponent has so many defends in their range, but I think it's a good spot to define their range a bit and then we can play rivers pretty easily. So I go ahead and make it 75. And then the villain throws in the call. And at this point, I'm pretty thoroughly convinced they have a strong ace or a king-x combination. So really hoping we get there on the river and we can get a massive overbet paid off. And then the river is the 9 of clubs. We do not get there on that river. When the villain checks it over to me, I am absolutely not going to bluff their super strong range here. I check it back and then the villain shows king jack offsuit. So there you go. Not too surprised to see the king in this spot, but I'm just thinking about how much money I would have won if we did get there on the river. Maybe next time. This next hand is another double board bomb pot. You'll love to see it. And then we're playing 6-handed and I'm in middle position with queen 9 offsuit. So we see the 2 flops. The first one is a6-5 with 2 hearts. Don't have much there except for a backdoor heart draw. But the second board is ace-ace 9 with 2 diamonds. So pretty happy with the second board. Because there is an ace on the first board, it makes it a lot less likely that my opponents do have trips. So when the action checks to me, I actually think this is a great hand to go ahead and bet here. We're going to benefit so much from equity denial since we have queen high on the first board, but can still get a little bit of value from a worse 9 on the second board as well as diamond draws. So I go ahead and bet 40. And then I only get called by a loose aggressive cutoff. So we are heads up to 2 different turns. The first one's a queen of diamonds. We love to see that. Our hand has definitely improved. And then on the second board, it is the jack of hearts. So the action's on me here. And again, out of position to a loose aggressive opponent with a hand that is pretty strong. Like I said, it's unlikely the opponent does have an ace-x since there's only one left in the deck. And there's a bunch of different draws on both boards that my opponent can have. I actually think this is a pretty clear-cut check to induce a bluff spot. I think betting here, it'd be a bit too thin and he would start to fold some of his non-nut flush draws. So I decide to check it over to the opponent, trying to induce something, and then we get some good news because they bet, they go ahead and make it 110. Now I think we have a pretty clear-cut just call here. Actually, I think we do scoop a lot of my opponent's betting range, but getting a check raise paid off will be pretty hard. I think they're going to bet fold pretty frequently here, which would actually make this a good spot to go ahead and check raise as a bluff. But when we've got a strong hand, I think it's a good spot to keep trapping. So I throw in the call, and then we see 2 different rivers. The first one is the 8 of clubs, and the second one is the 3 of hearts. So both the flush draws bricked. So now I think we just have to check it over to the opponent, trying to induce further action. So that's what I do. I check it over to them, and then they're checking back. So we don't like seeing that, but the chances we do scoop is very high. I show my queen 9, and then the villain shows 7-3 of diamonds. So they had a pretty nutted draw. They had a gut shot on the first board and a flush draw on the second board. But fortunately for us, neither draw got there, and we're going to scoop our second bomb pot for the session. Let's go. This next hand's definitely a sick one, so let's hop into it. Let me know how you'll play it below. But we see an open from a passive low jack to 15, and then a tight aggressive cut off 3 bets to 50. Then the action's on my button with ace king offsuit. Now I definitely want to go ahead and 4-bet this hand in this spot. If I was going to cold call a 3-bet, I would honestly rather do it with a hand that is essentially either a trap or a hand that's a lot weaker than ace king, because ace king is very nutted, of course, and we would love to get action with it. But even if we do fold out a hand like Queen Jack or something, we're happy to deny equity to it. If we fold out a hand like pocket sixes, that would actually be fantastic, since technically we were behind that hand. So I think with this specific hand in this makeup, it is absolutely a no-brainer 4-bet spot. I go ahead and make it 150, using a bit of a larger size because we are 1.4k effective with the cutoff 3-better. Then the action folds back to the low jack, who's in the tank a few seconds before deciding to 5-bet to 500, leaving themselves 300 behind. The cutoff ends up folding and the action's back on me here, and I hit the tank for probably a good 30 seconds or so, but honestly I don't think that was necessary when I do get 5-bet in a live 1-3 game from a passive opponent who didn't even move all in. I think that range is extremely nutted. If I was a betting man, I would bet good money that they have aces or kings here. If my read's wrong, the other likely hand they have is ace-king itself, which we're only chopping with, so our equity against that range is absolutely awful. So I really do think I need to be folding this hand. I think this opponent is likely just going to flat my 4-bet if they have queens, jacks, or ace-king most of the time, in all honesty. So I decide to make the discipline laydown. I do fold my ace-king pre-flop to a 5-bet. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. This next one's a bit of a doozy, and it starts off on a good note because we have that button straddle line. You love to see it. And there's 3 open limps before I peel. Ace-king offsuit again. Let's hope this hand treats me better this time. I raise it up to 35. And then the action's back on a loose aggressive small blind who actually back raises to 150 after limping. The other 2 limpers fold and the action's on me, and small blind back raise limp in a button straddle pot is a really strong move. They're essentially representing that they trapped pre-flop with aces kings, but being there's a loose aggressive opponent, if they were bluffing, I wouldn't be shocked. I definitely have an aggressive table image that they might be trying to push around, so I don't want to be folding a hand as strong as this yet, particularly when we're 1.3k effective, particularly when we have position. So I do decide to mix in the call here and go and see a heads up flop, which is 977 rainbow. The small blind c-bets for 100, and the action's on me. I think we have a pretty clear-cut call here. We're going to be ahead of all of my opponent's bluffs, and even if we are behind, we have pretty decent equities to suck out, particularly when we're getting such a good price to draw. So I do throw in the call here, and then we heads up to a turn, which is the 4 of clubs. The opponent does not slow down. They go ahead and bet 350. And now this is a pretty gross spot for us. I actually consider all 3 options here. If my opponent is bluffing, they have a bunch of different combinations they could be doing it with on this board, like king, queen, jack 10. They don't necessarily need to have a high amount of equity. They could just be using overcards. So it kind of tempts me to either throw in the call or raise all in for a bit of equity denial. And it might actually be a good spot to raise all in kind of as a bluff too, because if my opponent does have a hand like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, or some random 9x, I don't think they're going to call a shove when I'm going to have way more 7s in my range than them. They might put me on pocket 9s. They might put me on a trap with aces or kings pre-flop. So we actually have a pretty decent hand to go all in with, being that we have ace kings, so it's a lot less likely my opponent does have aces or kings. So I consider that as well. And of course I do consider just folding. I mean, sure, we block aces and kings, but like they still have plenty of combinations of them left. They could also just have pocket queens, pocket jacks, which probably won't fold to an all-in this spot. So after about 30 seconds of tanking or so, I do decide to muck my ace king, and then the villain was actually kind enough to show us his hand, and he had pocket 2s. So yeah, that's definitely a hand that would have folded to an all in. Glad I didn't flat and accidentally pay off their bluff, but yeah, leaving the session after this hand, after playing enough in what was not a great game, and leaving on a bit of a down note, kind of sort of getting value bluffed in this last hand. So there you have it, the most interesting hands we played across this 6-hour session. In terms of how I feel about my play, it's pretty inconsistent during this session. Plenty of mistakes, plenty of really good plays as well though. Did not like my queen jack barrel on the flop and turn, just not a hand I need to be super aggressive with. The queen jack offsuit isolation pre-flop. I mean, it came back to haunt me, but it was definitely a haunting I deserved for VPing that hand pre-flop. Other than that though, I do like a lot of the other hands I played. Really rate my line in both of the bomb pots. Think I absolutely maximize EV with those lines in my not so humble opinion. Good discipline with the ace king fold pre-flops, and the ace queen offsuit shove to get called by pocket sixes there for an overbet is, yeah, absolutely printing money to be value betting with that hand there. So I really do think it's a mixture between some like slight mistakes and a lot of really good plays. So I'm going to meet somewhere in the middle and land on a B plus for this session. It's definitely too much mistakes, too much of an over aggression bias for an A grade, but there were some A quality plays in the mix there. And my subpar inconsistent performance was sort of reflected in my results. Lost 128 on this session. So not a huge loss or anything, but it's definitely going to put a little bit of a dent in our win rate for the 1-3 and definitely falling further away from the $60 an hour. But fortunately, we've still got the rest of the month to try and chase and get back up to that $60 an hour. So make sure you hit subscribe and you'll get my next session at the Derby Lane. For now though, I'm out of here. Na sweater null.